The kickboxer stood in the middle of the cage. He had just won his fight. He knocked his opponent out in the second round. His body was full of adrenaline. The crowd was screaming. Then he did something nobody expected. He pointed straight into the crowd, front row, right at a man wearing a black hoodie and dark sunglasses trying not to be noticed. "You!" the kickboxer shouted into the microphone. "Yeah, you in the hoodie. You think you're tough just sitting there? Get in here. I'll fight you right now." The crowd exploded. Fighters didn't do this. They didn't call out random people from the audience. This had never happened before. The man in the hoodie didn't move. He just stayed in his seat, calm. The kickboxer kept talking. "What's wrong? You scared? Everyone's looking at you, big man. Come on, get in here and show everybody what you've got." What the kickboxer didn't know was that the man in the hoodie was Mike Tyson. He had just gotten out of prison. He was sitting right by the cage at one of the very first Ultimate Fighting Championship events. He was only there to watch. He wasn't looking for trouble. Not until now. In about 5 minutes, this kickboxer would regret every word he had just said. The athletic commission would panic, the crowd would completely lose their minds, and everyone in the building would see something that was never supposed to happen because Mike Tyson was about to step into that cage. And the kickboxer had no idea who he had just challenged. It was November 1993. The UFC had only started 6 months earlier. The first event, UFC 1, had taken place on November 12, 1993. Now it was UFC 2, on December 16, 1993, in Denver. About 2,500 people were packed inside the arena. This was nothing like boxing. There were no weight classes yet. Some fights didn't even have time limits. There were very few rules. It was just fighting, simple, raw, and rough. One man was running through everyone, Royce Gracie. He was beating much bigger men using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he was changing how people thought about fighting. Mike Tyson had been invited as a special guest. He wasn't there to compete, only to watch. The UFC wanted big names in the crowd. They wanted attention, and Mike was perfect. He was still the most famous name in combat sports, even though he hadn't fought since 1991. Mike was going through a very hard period in his life. He had just gone through a long and painful trial and had been sentenced to 6 years in prison. His appeals were still in progress. For now, he was out on bail, waiting. Trying to live his life while not knowing what would happen next. He was supposed to report to prison in 2 months in February 1992. So he was making public appearances, staying visible, staying relevant, hoping somehow that the appeal might work. He came to UFC 2 in normal street clothes, black hoodie, dark sunglasses, trying not to stand out. He didn't want attention. He only wanted to watch a few fights and see what this new UFC thing was all about. He sat in the front row, right next to several UFC executives, right next to Bob Merowitz, one of the men who helped create the UFC. They explained the idea to him, how it was different from boxing, how this could be the future of fighting. Mike was interested. He watched the first few matches, where he saw Royce Gracie submit men much bigger than himself. He watched the ground fighting, the grappling. It was very different from what he knew, but he respected it. Then the co-main event started. A fighter named Marco "the Hammer" Delacruz faced a wrestler from Oklahoma. Marco was 28 years old. He was a former kickboxing champion from Brazil. He had trained in Muay Thai since he was 12. He moved to the United States 2 years earlier. He heard about the UFC and saw his chance. He started training on the ground. He wasn't great at it yet, but he was good enough. He was 6'2", 225 pounds, all muscle, covered in tattoos, with a mohawk haircut. He looked like a movie villain, and his ego was just as big. For weeks before the fight, Marco had been talking non-stop, saying he would knock everyone out, saying the UFC would belong to him, saying he was the future of the sport. The fight began. The wrestler tried to take Marco down. Marco defended well and stayed on his feet. He landed a hard head kick. The wrestler dropped. Marco jumped in and kept hitting until the referee stopped the fight in the second round. It was over. Marco won by TKO. The crowd went crazy. Marco stood in the center of the cage with his arms in the air, yelling. That's when he noticed the microphone hanging nearby for post-fight interviews. Marco grabbed it. He was breathing hard, sweating. Blood from his opponent was still on his gloves. "UFC!" Marco shouted. "This is my house now. Nobody can touch me. Nobody!" The crowd cheered. It was loud. It was flashy. It was good entertainment. Then Marco made a mistake. A very big mistake. He looked toward the front row, and he saw Mike sitting there. He didn't recognize him, just saw a man in a hoodie sitting relaxed, not reacting to the fight like everyone else, just calm, cool. And Marco's ego took over. "You!" Marco pointed right at Mike. "Yeah, you in the black hoodie, you sitting there looking tough. You think you can do better? You think you can handle what I just did?" Mike didn't move, just looked at him through the sunglasses. The crowd was confused. What was Marco doing? Why was he calling out some random person? "What's wrong?" Marco continued. "Scared? Everyone's watching. Come on, step in here and show me what you got." The UFC executives next to Mike were panicking. They knew who Mike was. They knew this was a bad idea. "Don't," one of them whispered to Mike. "He doesn't know who you are." Just ignore him." But Marco wouldn't stop. "Look at this guy," Marco said to the crowd, "sitting there in his hoodie and sunglasses like he's somebody, probably never been in a fight in his life. Come on, tough guy, show everyone you're not just talk." Mike's jaw tightened. You could see the muscle working. He was trying to stay calm, trying to ignore this, but Marco wasn't letting it go. "Tell you what," Marco said, "I'll give you a free shot, one punch right here." He tapped his jaw. "You land it clean, I'll give you $5,000, right now, cash." The crowd was loving this, chanting, "Do it, do it, do it." Mike looked at the UFC executives, at Bob Marowitz. Bob was shaking his head. "Don't do it, Mike. This is bad for everyone." $5,000, Marco shouted. "Easy money unless you're too scared." That word, scared. And that was the trigger. Mike stood up, slow, deliberate. He took off his sunglasses, folded them, handed them to Bob. "Mike, don't," Bob said urgently. "He asked for it," Mike said, his voice quiet, calm, dangerous. Mike took off his hoodie. He was wearing a black t-shirt underneath, his shoulders, his neck, that distinctive Tyson build visible. Some people in the crowd were starting to recognize him. "Oh shit," someone yelled. "That's Mike Tyson." "What?" someone else said. "That's Mike fucking Tyson." The word spread through the arena like wildfire. Within seconds, everyone knew. The man Marco had just challenged, the random person in the hoodie. It was Mike Tyson. Marco was still in the octagon. He heard the name, Mike Tyson. His face changed, confidence drained, replaced by confusion, then fear. "Wait," Marco said into the microphone. That's Mike Tyson?" The crowd was going absolutely insane now, screaming, cheering. This was the craziest thing they'd ever seen at a UFC event. Mike walked toward the octagon, calm, measured, not rushing, just walking. The commission officials were scrambling. This couldn't happen. This wasn't sanctioned, wasn't legal. They tried to stop it, but the crowd wouldn't let them. They were chanting, "Tyson! Tyson! Tyson!" Mike reached the octagon door. The referee stood there, blocking it. "Mr. Tyson, I can't let you in. This isn't a sanctioned fight." "He challenged me," Mike said, "in front of everyone. You gonna let him just talk shit and walk away? This is against regulations. Move." Something in Mike's voice made the referee step aside. This was Mike Tyson. You don't tell Mike Tyson no. Mike stepped into the octagon. The door closed behind him. Marco stood in the center, still holding the microphone. His bravado was completely gone. He looked terrified. I didn't know it was you," Marco said, his voice shaking. "But you knew it was somebody," Mike said. "You challenged somebody, talked shit about somebody. Now that somebody's here, so what you gonna do?" Marco looked around, at the crowd, at the officials, at the exit, looking for an escape. There wasn't one. "Look, man, I was just hyped up, just won my fight. Was just talking." "You said I was scared," Mike interrupted. "Said I never been in a fight. Said you'd give me a free shot. I didn't mean, so give me my free shot." Marco was frozen. He was a fighter, a trained fighter, but he'd fought welterweights, middleweights, men his size or smaller. He'd never faced someone like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, who'd destroyed 37 opponents, who'd knocked out champions, who was the most feared puncher in boxing history. And Marco had just called him out on live television. Mike took off his shirt, handed it to the referee. He was in prison shape, not peak Mike Tyson shape, but still intimidating, still powerful. The crowd was going wild. Cameras were flashing. This was surreal. Mike Tyson was about to fight in the UFC, unplanned, unsanctioned, but happening. The referee looked at the commission officials. They were signaling to stop it, but the referee knew he couldn't. The crowd would riot. This was beyond his control now. "All right," the referee said. "I can't sanction this, but if you're both agreeing to whatever this is, I'll oversee it. Marco, you said one free punch. Mike gets one punch. Then it's over. Understood?" Marco nodded, reluctant. "Mike?" the referee asked. "One punch," Mike said. "That's all I need." They moved to the center of the octagon. Marco was in his fighting stance, hands up, but they were shaking. His whole body was tense, not ready, just scared. Mike was relaxed, hands at his sides, not even in a stance, just standing there. "Marco," the referee said, "you said he gets a free shot. Where do you want to take it?" Marco touched his jaw, the spot he'd shown Mike earlier. "Here." but make it quick. Step back, the referee told Mike. Give him space, then come in when you're ready. Mike stepped back 5 feet. He looked at Marco, at his stance, at his jaw, at the target. You sure about this? Mike asked. Just do it, Marco said, trying to sound brave, failing. Mike nodded. Then he moved. Not fast, not his usual explosive speed. Just a simple step forward, weight transfer, hip rotation, shoulder turn, fist extends, a straight right hand, textbook, perfect form. It landed right on Marco's jaw, the exact spot Marco had indicated. The sound echoed through the arena, a sharp crack like a baseball bat hitting leather. Marco's head snapped to the side. His eyes went blank. His knees buckled. He dropped, not slow, not catching himself, just straight down, face first into the canvas, out cold. The arena exploded. The noise was deafening. People were jumping, screaming, throwing drinks in the air. This was the craziest thing they'd ever witnessed. Mike stood over Marco, looked down at him. No emotion, no celebration, just business. The referee rushed over to Marco, checked him. He was breathing, just unconscious. The punch hadn't broken anything, just shut his brain off for a minute. Medical staff rushed in. They rolled Marco onto his back, checked his vitals, started bringing him around. Mike walked to the octagon door, picked up his shirt, put it back on. Put his hoodie back on, put his sunglasses back on, like nothing had happened. The crowd was still going crazy, chanting his name. Tyson! 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 Mike walked back to his seat, sat down. Bob Merowitz was sitting there with his mouth open, speechless. Sorry about that, Mike said. Sorry? Bob laughed, shocked. Mike, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Do you know what you just did? Guy challenged me. I accepted. One punch, just like he asked. That's going to be everywhere tomorrow. Every news station, every newspaper, everyone's going to be talking about this. Good, Mike said. Maybe next time someone won't run their mouth without knowing who they're talking to. In the octagon, Marco was coming around, medical staff helping him sit up. His jaw was swelling already, would be bruised for weeks, but nothing was broken. He was lucky. Mike had held back, could have broken his jaw, could have done real damage. He chose not to. Marco looked around, confused. What happened? You got knocked out, one of the medical staff said. By who? Mike Tyson. Memory came back. Marco's face went pale. Oh God, I challenged Mike Tyson. I actually challenged Mike Tyson. Yeah, you did, and he accepted. Did I land anything? You didn't throw anything. He got his free shot. One punch. You went out like a light. Marco put his head in his hands. This was the most embarrassing moment of his career, maybe his life. They helped him out of the octagon, walked him backstage. The crowd was still buzzing, still talking about what just happened. The main event was supposed to happen next, but nobody cared. They'd just seen Mike Tyson knock out a UFC fighter with one punch. Nothing was topping that. The broadcast team was scrambling. They hadn't caught it on camera. It happened too fast, too unexpectedly. They had crowd footage, people with camcorders, but no official footage. Do we talk about it? One announcer asked. We have to, the other said. Everyone saw it. We can't pretend it didn't happen. They came back from commercial, addressed it head on. Ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed something unprecedented in UFC history. Mike Tyson, heavyweight boxing champion, just knocked out Marco Delacruz with a single punch. This was not a sanctioned bout. This was a challenge issued by Delacruz and accepted by Tyson. We want to be clear that UFC does not condone unsanctioned fights, but we cannot deny what you all just saw. The crowd cheered. They didn't care about sanctions. They'd just seen Mike Tyson knock someone out in the UFC octagon. The main event happened. Royce Gracie won again, submitted his opponent, but everyone was still talking about Mike. That was the story, what people would remember. Backstage, Marco sat in the medical room, ice on his jaw, ego shattered. His coach was there, his manager. Everyone was quiet. I fucked up, Marco said finally. Yeah, you did, his coach said. I didn't recognize him. He was wearing sunglasses, a hoodie. I just saw a man sitting there calm. Thought I'd call him out. He'd make a show of it. You called out Mike Tyson. What did you think would happen? I don't know. I don't follow boxing. I train, that's it. I don't watch other sports, don't follow other fighters. I knew the name Mike Tyson, but I didn't know his face. Didn't know what he looked like. His manager shook his head. Everyone knows what Mike Tyson looks like. Apparently not me. There was a knock on the door. It opened. Mike Tyson walked in. Everyone froze. Marco looked up, fear in his eyes. Can we talk? Mike asked, calm, non-threatening. Marco nodded, couldn't speak. Mike's coach and manager left, gave them privacy. The door closed. Mike sat down across from Marco, looked at him for a long moment. You all right? Mike asked. My jaw hurts. My pride hurts worse. I held back. Could have hit you harder, didn't need to. Thanks. I guess. You called me out, in front of everyone, talked shit, said I was scared. What did you think was going to happen? Marco took a breath. Honestly, I didn't think. I just won, was pumped up. Saw a guy in the front row not reacting, thought I'd make him part of the show. I'm an idiot. You are, Mike agreed. But you're also young. You'll learn. Learn what? To respect people. Don't challenge someone unless you're ready for them to accept. Don't talk shit unless you can back it up. And definitely don't assume someone's weak just because they're sitting quiet. Marco nodded. I'm sorry. For what I said. For challenging you. For being disrespectful. Apology accepted. But remember this feeling. Remember how it felt to talk big and then get humbled. Use it. Become better. Mike stood up, extended his hand. Marco took it. But they shook. You're good at what you do, Mike said. I watched your fight before you called me out. You got skills, you got power, but you got no discipline, no respect. Fix that and you'll go far. Keep acting like you did tonight, you'll get knocked out again. Noted. Mike walked to the door, stopped, turned back. One more thing. Learn who the legends are. Study boxing, study wrestling, study all combat sports. You're in a new era where everything mixes together. If you don't know the history, don't know the greats, you're going to keep making mistakes, like challenging Mike Tyson to fight you. Marco laughed, a painful laugh. His jaw hurt. Yeah, definitely won't make that mistake again. Mike left. Marco sat there, ice on his jaw, thinking about what just happened. The next day, it was everywhere. Every sports show, every news station, even non-sports media. Mike Tyson knocks out UFC fighter after being challenged from audience. Tyson shows why he's called Iron Mike, one-punch knockout in UFC octagon. UFC fighter makes huge mistake, challenges Mike Tyson, gets destroyed. The footage was grainy, shot from crowd cameras, but you could see everything. Marco pointing at Mike. Mike standing up, taking off his hoodie, getting in the octagon, the punch, the knockout. It was played over and over in slow motion from different angles. Everyone was analyzing it. Boxing analysts weighed in. That's vintage Mike Tyson. Perfect technique, perfect power. Marco never had a chance. UFC analysts weighed in. This shows the different levels of striking. Marco's a good kickboxer, but Mike Tyson's an elite boxer. There's a difference, the UFC released a statement. Last night's incident between Mike Tyson and Marco Delacruz was not sanctioned by UFC. It was a spontaneous response to a public challenge. UFC does not condone or encourage this behavior. However, we understand the circumstances and are not pursuing any action against Mr. Tyson. The Athletic Commission investigated, interviewed witnesses, watched the footage. They ultimately decided no action was necessary. It was clearly a challenge issued by Marco. Mike just accepted. No rules were broken technically because it wasn't a sanctioned fight. Mike's legal team was nervous. He was on bail, waiting for his appeal. This kind of publicity wasn't good, made him look violent, uncontrolled. But the public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People thought Marco deserved it. B thought he was asking for it. Thought Mike showed restraint by only throwing one punch. Mike did one interview about it with ESPN 2 days later. Mike, what were you thinking when Marco challenged you? I was thinking he doesn't know who I am, and I should just ignore him. But you didn't ignore him. No, he kept pushing, kept calling me scared, in front of everyone. I couldn't let that slide. Were you trying to hurt him? No, I was trying to teach him, one punch. That's all it took to show him he made a mistake. If I wanted to hurt him, I could have. I didn't. Some people are saying you overreacted, that you should have just stayed in your seat. Those people weren't the ones being disrespected, being called out in front of thousands of people, being called scared. If they were in my position, and they might have done the same thing. Do you regret it? No. Guy challenged me. I accepted. He got what he asked for. Maybe next time he'll think before he talks. Marco did his own interview. Different show. Same day. Marco, what were you thinking challenging Mike Tyson? I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. I was hyped up from my win. Saw a guy in the crowd. Didn't recognize him. Thought I'd make a show of it. Turned out to be the worst decision of my life. Did you really not know it was Mike Tyson? I really didn't. I don't follow boxing. I train kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. That's it. I knew the name Mike Tyson. Everyone knows that name. But I didn't know his face, didn't recognize him. How's your jaw? Bruised, sore, but not broken. I'm lucky. Mike held back. Could have really hurt me, chose not to. I'm grateful for that. What did you learn? Respect? Humility? Don't challenge people you don't know, and definitely learn who the legends are before you talk shit. 2 months later, Mike reported to prison in February 1992. His appeal was denied. He would serve his time. While he was inside, the UFC continued to grow. Marco continued to fight, had a decent career, won some, lost some. Never became champion, but made a living. And every time someone interviewed him, they asked about Mike Tyson, about that night, about the one punch. Marco was always honest. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life, and the most important lesson I ever learned. Don't let your ego write checks your body can't cash. Mike served 3 years, was released in 1995. He came back to boxing, destroyed Peter McNeely in 89 seconds. Then, Bruno in 3 rounds. He reclaimed his championship. In 1996, someone asked him about the Marco incident, about UFC 2, about getting in the octagon. That was a lifetime ago, Mike said. Different world. But I remember it. Remember that kid calling me out. Remember teaching him a lesson. Hope he learned from it. Would you ever fight in the UFC for real? Nah, that's not my world. I'm a boxer. Always have been, always will be. But I respect what they do. It's different. It's evolution. Combat sports are growing, changing. That's good. You think you could have competed in the UFC? Mike smiled. I think I showed I could compete. 1 punch, 1 knockout. That's all the proof I needed. Years later, in 2024, the story was still told. It was UFC legend now, the time Mike Tyson got challenged by a fighter from the audience and knocked him out with 1 punch. Marco was retired now, coaching young fighters. He taught them technique, taught them respect. And he always told them about that night. I was young, stupid, full of myself, Marco said. Thought I was invincible because I just won a fight. Saw a guy in the crowd, called him out. Turns out it was Mike Tyson. He knocked me out with 1 punch. Best thing that ever happened to me. Best thing? His students asked. Yeah, because it taught me humility, taught me respect, taught me that there's always someone better, someone tougher, someone who can humble you in a second. That lesson made me a better fighter, made me a better person. So yeah, best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it was the most embarrassing. The footage still exists on YouTube, millions of views, comments full of people amazed that it happened, amazed that Mike Tyson knocked out a UFC fighter. This is insane. Marco learned the hard way. Don't challenge legends. Mike Tyson in the UFC cage is something I never thought I'd see. It's one of those moments that shouldn't exist, that breaks the rules, that crosses boundaries. But it happened anyway, because a young kickboxer let his ego take over, challenged a random man in the audience, and that random man turned out to be the baddest man on the planet. Mike Tyson in a hoodie and sunglasses, trying to watch fights in peace until someone forced his hand. And then, with 1 punch, he reminded everyone why you don't challenge people you don't know. Why you don't assume someone's weak because they're sitting quiet. Why you don't let your mouth write checks your body can't cash. Marco Delacruz learned that lesson in front of 2,500 people at UFC 2 and millions more who watched it after. 1 challenge, 1 punch, 1 knockout, 1 lesson. That's the story of the kickboxer who challenged Mike Tyson, who didn't know he picked the wrong man, who paid the price in the most public way possible, and who, somehow, came out better for it. Because that's the real lesson. It's not about Mike Tyson being tough. Everyone knows Mike Tyson's tough. It's about respecting people, knowing your limits, understanding that confidence without wisdom is just arrogance waiting to be humbled. Marco learned that in 1 punch. That's the story. That's what happened. The night a kickboxer challenged a random man at UFC 2 and discovered that random man was Mike Tyson. 1 punch, 1 lesson, 1 moment that neither of them ever forgot.